about and when you're speaking of like Reaganomics and stuff like that, I hate to go back in the past with Obama, but I wished he would have said we will no longer trickle down, that we will trickle up and come out of the middle. Yeah. I don't know why he had 8 years to turn around Reaganomics and he didn't. That's the one big disappointment I have with
well,
Obama.
he did and he didn't. He had 74 days where he had a filibuster-proof Senate. Out of his entire 8 years, he had 74 business days, congressional work days. And in those 74 days, they got a hell of a lot done. I mean, the middle class, the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the country. He saved Chrysler. He saved GM. You know, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month when he came into office. He ended that. He raised education spending, cut the cost of student loans, strengthened hate crime laws, passed the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, expanded children's health insurance program, a brand new enforcement of child labor laws, Wall Street reform, credit card reform, stopped lending to predatory lending to soldiers. Paid the troops for stop-loss time, where George W. Bush had been ripping them off, stopped torture, increased VA spending, equal pay for women. I mean, you know, it just goes on and on. Got $20 billion out of BP. He got a lot done. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't FDR, but you know, this wasn't the middle of the Great Depression either. I mean, it could have been if it had been bad enough if the Fed had reacted as badly as they did in 1929. But I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that we can hold President Obama responsible for it. Maine, thank you for the call, though, because your point is, you know, it's a micro example that demonstrates the macro issue, the larger issue of basically the destruction of our country by right-wing ideologies promulgated by right-wing billionaires and ideologues. Maine, thanks a lot for the call. I got to move along. Azila in Seattle. Hey, Azila, what's up? Thanks for listening to KBCS.
It is Aliza.
Aliza. Yeah.
Hi, Tom. This is Aliza from Seattle. Thank you for all you do. I'm just calling to say that we should have a massive health march, as massive as the Women's March. I want to hear your thoughts. And that's, I guess, all what I wanted to say. I could also add other things, but
I don't think it would be a bad idea, but I think it's kind of happening in small ways on a de facto basis all over the country. You've got, you know, congressmen who are being pursued, shall we say. You know, people are trying to figure out a way to reach particularly Republican congressmen who seem to be in hiding. But, you know, people are figuring out a way to get the message through that they're not happy with what these guys are trying to do, gutting Medicaid, destroying Medicaid. And now we learned from the CBO yesterday that while in that 10-year window that they had originally scored for the Republicans saw 22 million people being thrown off Medicaid with about a 25% cut of Medicaid benefits, if you look 20 years out, it's a 35% cut in Medicaid benefits, which means even more people will die. Right now, we're just looking at a couple 100,000 people. It'll be a lot more than that. Aliza, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's Anything Goes Friday and Anything Goes Summer. And welcome back, Joe in Hamilton, Alabama. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV on Direct.
Hey, Tom. Great job. I've called you several times. I'm probably one of them that's going to pass away if this happens. No fault to me. You know, things in the past, that's another story. My question is, I get my news sources from everywhere, you know, and then I compile them and come up with my own, you know, thoughts about it. But the Koch brothers have been having commercials on CNN.
Right. And MSNBC, too.
Are they aligning with CNN? Or I'm going to give you a couple questions and then I'll get off. Don't know what's going on there.
Well, I can just tell you real quickly, Joe, as long as BP and the gas industry run ads on CNN and MSNBC, you will not see any stories about, you know, BP fouling the Gulf or climate change or the destruction of our planet by the fossil fuel industry. Similarly, as long as Koch Industries advertises on CNN and MSNBC, you're probably not going to hear much mention of the Koch brothers and their political activity. I believe that this is a way of, it's like laying down cover. They're trying to prevent discussion in the media of, the product of Koch Industries, that is the profits that go to the Koch brothers, being used for perfidious political purposes. Back to you, Joe.
I just had wondered if there was some kind of war going on there between them. And my other question was this ONA news sources that I've been finding. It's actually the next channel above you on DirecTV. It's One American News. What do you think of that, or do you even know of it?
Yeah, I do. It's one of several new right-wing networks that came about, kind of trying to imitate what Glenn Beck did. Creating what was originally just an online news network, and now they've got some space on a couple of satellites, or at least one. And I don't know if they've got any cable space or not, but it's just it's a billionaire's toy. It's another news network that's going to present the point of view of these right-wing billionaires. It's just real simple. So, unless the purpose of your call was to promote it and get people to go looking for it, which, who knows? But that's what I know about it. So, yeah, how much time do we have? 45 seconds. That's not fair to put somebody on with 45 seconds. The other things that President Obama did, he strengthened the EPA. He broadened the powers of the Food and Drug Administration. He finally got 9/11 responders health care funding. I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling when you think about how George W. Bush exploited 9/11 mercilessly for 7 years, 7.5 years. Just everything he did had 9/11 at the end of the sentence. And yet he consistently refused to pay for the health care of the people who volunteered to help clean up that site and initially look for people who might be saved, and then later help recover body parts so that families could be, have some closure with their people. President Obama got that funded, and of course he repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was the beginning of the process of actually integrating gay people into our military, which has happened now and seems to be working just fine. So, anyhow, back with more of your calls right after this statement. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Anything Goes Friday. Thomas in Blakesley, Pennsylvania. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
There's just two things. One is about Donald Trump as a man, and I think he's a throwback to the male chauvinist pig, because anyone else who's not white and male, he has, just total contempt for. And that's the reason why that when he was just a real estate developer in little old New York City, that's the office he held. But once he had seen this black man hold an even higher office, the President of the United States, that kind of hurt him to his core as far as his white privilege. And from that point on, he has been obsessed with Obama because he's been trying to wipe out Obama's history as far as his accomplishments, because of the fact that he can't get the adulation, he can't get the respect that Obama has gotten for the past 8 years. So he's going to try to wipe out his accomplishments altogether.
Right. I agree. And it's not just, Trump. I mean, you got Joe, you lie, deadbeat dad Walsh. There's, in Congress, there's a bunch of these guys who, in my opinion, just can't handle the fact that there was a black man in the White House. And
the other thing I wanted to ask you, don't you think this health care plan is just a rouge? Because the real target behind this whole health care plan is trying to get rid of Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security,
right,
because these are federally funded programs.
Yep, I agree.
Why would they want Obamacare, which is another federally funded program, when they've been trying to get rid of Medicaid even as far as when Paul Ryan was in grade school.
Right.
You know, far back. So
you've got a couple hundred billionaires and multimillionaires who call themselves the Koch network, who have just pledged $400 million for the next campaign cycle for this off presidential 2018. You know, for this midterm presidential cycle, and they are very upset about the fact that they're having to pay an extra 3.8% in taxes in order to pay for Medicare and Medicaid expansion and Obamacare, in order to pay for health care for working people and, well, I was going to say and poor people, except that the Medicaid expansion, you have to be working to be eligible for that federal Medicaid expansion. For people who are disabled or not working at all, they already qualify for state-based Medicaid. So it's just, it's a bunch of cranky billionaires, and with hoarding syndrome. But because they were born rich or made rich, as most of them were born rich, they instead of hoarding cardboard boxes and tin cans and things, they're hoarding money. And it's the Scrooge McDuck syndrome: more money for the money bin. And it's sad psychologically, culturally, sociologically. It's destructive, and it's damaging our country. But that's what's going on, and they're funding news agencies, so-called news agencies. You got a billionaire Rupert Murdoch with Fox so-called news. You got right-wing news on radio all across the United States. These stations owned by a small handful of right-wing companies. You've got right-wing publishing companies that subsidize this stuff. You've got think tanks. I mean, there's a whole industry funded by this handful, this a couple hundred billionaires and multimillionaires, and a few. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a couple hundred corporations. And they are hell-bent for leather on turning this country back to 1900, back before unions, before child labor laws, you name it. And Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court is their ultimate dream. This guy is so retrograde. He is to the right of Antonin Scalia. I never thought that was possible, but he is far to the right of Antonin Scalia. It's an amazing piece over at thinkprogress.org about him today. It's really, really worth reading. Thomas, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It was, very thoughtful. I appreciate it. Noel in Riverside, California, or Noel. Noel, what's up?
Good, you got it right, Noel.
Noel, oh, great.
Hi. Yes, another thing about President Obama is I'll forever be grateful to him on the home modified loans he did. Mm-hmm. He decreased my monthly payment at least a couple $100 every month, and it'll stay that way till the end of my loan, and I'll be forever grateful for that.
That's marvelous.
Plus the many other things he did. Also, two things real quick. Regarding the Antichrist comment made the other day, the Bible says there will be many Antichrists in the world, and the last one is the one that will demand the mark of the beast. And in the Hebrew, it calls him an unnatural being, which could mean AI, ET, or transhuman, something like that. So there is a big one at play that's going to be a big force. And regarding Trump, Disney World in Florida, they have this aisle that has characters, robotics of the presidents, and then they say famous quotes. And they said, in Huffington Post, they said this might be the first time they might have to muzzle the president's robot. One petition asked Disney to make sure Trump's animatronic figure didn't speak, especially when some of his more famous quotes are, grab them by the private.
X-rated, yeah.
Angela Merkel is a so-and-so. I could shoot anyone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. So they're having a big debate over how they're going to silence his robot. I thought that was kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tom, very much.
Thanks,
Have
Noel.
a great weekend.
Yeah, good talking with you. Geez, shades of the Firesign Theaters. I think we're all bozos on this Bus album, where Clem goes to the Future Fair, where there's a hologram, which is the president, right? And he gets to talk to the hologram of the president. It's like Disney, only at the end, he hits it with a insoluble question. Why does the dodo bird lay its egg in the sky? And the machine starts freaking out and shutting down, and all of a sudden all the holograms start turning off, and pretty soon the whole world goes dark, and then the universe the stars start winking out, and Clem discovers he's all alone. It's just an amazing. It's amazing. Anyhow, Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald. Thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Yes, Tom. Maybe you can make me understand this because I'm totally confused what's going on with the health care. Since they're planning to move the health care and having it replaced in another year, does that mean we're still under Obamacare?
Yes, we are. And what they're talking about is cutting funding to 90% next year, or maybe it's 95%, and then but dropping it by 5% a year for the first couple of years. Most of the cuts come after the 10-year window. So by the end of 10 years, they will have cut Medicare by about 25%. And the CBO came out yesterday and said that in the subsequent years, if you go 10 to 20 years out, you'll see a 35% cut in Medicare. And this at the same time as the baby boomer generation is aging into nursing homes, and the demand for Medicaid, if I said Medicare, I meant Medicaid, the demand for Medicaid is going to be exploding over the next 2 decades. And that's exactly the time that they're cutting it because, you know, the billionaires don't want to pay for it.
Okay, so if that's the case, then my health care, because I'm on Social Security and Medicare, but my wife pays for Obamacare. We were paying $800 a month, a little over $800 a month. Now it's gone to $1,100 a month. I'm afraid that these people are going to sabotage it so much that it's going to go to $2,000 a month.
Yep.
If we can't afford it and we have to drop it, do we have to start paying that taxes that are attributed to Obamacare? You know, the mandatory taxes. Is that still going to be in place?
Well, in theory, that tax was never, there was no enforcement mechanism written into the law for that tax. So the IRS cannot enforce it. So if you are without health insurance and, in theory, you're supposed to pay that tax, but you don't absolutely have to, I guess, you know, it's but that would be the least of my concerns, Donald. If you don't have health insurance, that would be a giant red flag. You know,
I know it would. I had cancer already.
Yeah.
And not only that, there too, the Democrats are not talking about the sabotage that was going on to destroy Obamacare, that it was working. They're not saying enough about that. They're just letting the Republicans control the media, and that's bothering the hell out of me.
I agree. It bothers the hell out of me, too. And by the way, Obamacare is working just fine in California, and it's working just fine in those states that put it into place the way it was designed to be. But in states that have taken the waivers so that insurance companies can sell crappy policies, like Iowa, for example, it's destroying the market because young, healthy people are buying these cheap, crappy policies, which dumps sick people into Obamacare, which destroys Obamacare. Donald, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeats.com. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
He worked most of his life in the interest of the rich and powerful and was chomping at the bit for a chance to turn more of America over to his friends. As Jeffrey Toobin wrote in The New Yorker, quote, "In every major case since he became the nation's 17th Chief Justice, Roberts has sided with the prosecution over the defendant, the state over the condemned, the executive branch over the legislative, and the corporate defendant over the individual plaintiff. Even more than Scalia, who has embodied judicial conservatism during a generation of service on the Supreme Court, Roberts has served the interests and reflected the values of the contemporary Republican Party." End of quote. And the fastest way the modern Republican Party could recover its power over the next decade was to immediately clear away all impediments to unrestrained corporate participation in electoral politics. If a corporation likes a politician, it can ensure that he is elected every time. If it becomes upset with a politician, it can carpet bomb her district and with a few $1 million worth of ads and politically destroy her. In the Citizens United case, the Roberts courts listened to arguments and took briefs and even discussed it among themselves as if they were going to make a decision. But instead of deciding the case on the relatively narrow grounds on which it had originally been argued, whether a single part of a single piece of legislation, in this case McCain-Feingold, was unconstitutional, the court asked for it to be re-argued in September 2009 and asked that the breadth of the arguments be expanded to re-examine the rationales for Congress to have any power to regulate so-called free speech by corporations. In this, they were going along with a request from Theodore B. Olson, who argued Bush v. Gore and would not just look at this narrow case, but go back nearly 20 years to re-examine and perhaps overturn their own ruling in the Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, where the court held that it was constitutional for Congress to pass limits on corporate political activities, as well as its decision in 2003 to uphold McCain-Feingold as constitutional. The setup for this 2010 decision came in June of 2007 in the Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life case, in which the Robert courts ruled that the FCC could not prevent Wisconsin Right to Life from running ads just because it was a corporation. The idea of Congress passing laws that limited corporate free speech was clearly horrifying to both Roberts and Scalia. Scalia went after the 1990 Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, in which the then Rehnquist court had ruled that the Michigan Chamber of Commerce was limited in its free speech in a political campaign because it was a corporation. Scalia complained this Austin was the only pre-McConnell case that this court had ever permitted the government to restrict political speech based on the corporate identity of the speaker. Austin upheld state restrictions on corporate independent expenditures. And God forbid, the statute had been modeled after the federal statute, the BCRA 203 amended. End of quote. The Austin case, Scalia concluded, with 4 others nodding, was a significant departure from ancient First Amendment principles. In my view, it was wrongly decided. Scalia was quoted at length from opinions in the Grosjean v. American Press 1936 case. In Scalia's words, quote, holding that corporations are guaranteed the freedom of speech and of press, safeguarded by the due process of law clause of the 14th Amendment. He also quoted the 1986 Pacific Gas and Electric Company versus Public Utility Commission of California case. The identity of the speaker is not decisive in determining whether speech is protected. Corporations and other associations, like individuals, contribute to the discussion, debate, and the dissemination of information and ideas that the First Amendment seeks to foster. The bottom line for Scalia was, quote, the principle that such advocacy is at the heart of the First Amendment's protection and is indispensable to decision-making in a democracy is no less true because the speech comes from a corporation rather than an individual. The book, Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and really super pleased to have on the line with us Congressman Keith Ellison. He is brilliantly representing the 5th District of Minnesota, the Deputy Director of the DNC. His website, ellison.house.gov or democrats.org, and you can tweet him at Keith Ellison. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good to be back, man, and thank you for bringing it every single day, all the time, so people know what's going on around here.
We're doing our best. We are absolutely doing our best, and I understand that you're more than happy to take calls from our listeners today if anybody has any. So if you have a question for the number 2 guy in the Democratic Party and one of our best and most progressive members of the United States House of Representatives, give us a shout at 202-808-9925. Congressman, what is on your agenda right now? What are you looking at? I just noticed that apparently the last person Donald Trump talked to yesterday about health care was Rand Paul, and so now he's going out and saying, well, Rand Paul says we should repeal Obamacare altogether, just do away with everything, and then we'll fix it later. Not to worry, right? Just get rid of those taxes on the billionaires. What do you think?
Well, what I think is this. Back when they were having 60 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and I might say, Tom, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, their big complaint was that, the people who were on the exchanges, that they weren't working very well, and this had to change. And they also made up some stuff about death panels, and we all remember that mess. The problem is nothing in the American Health Care Act or any version of Trump Care really addresses any of these problems. In fact, they make them worse. They make every plan to have higher deductibles, and the premiums will go up by dramatically, and they'll serve far fewer people. The only salient feature of every iteration of Trump Care, House, Senate, whatever, is that it massively rewards the richest people by cutting their taxes. So all that mess, all that trouble they caused back in 2010, all the fighting, all the allegations, all the money they spent was only to help the richest people in America get more money. And that to me seems pretty pathetic.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, it truly is. And not only that, we're looking at the possibility of literally hundreds of thousands of Americans over the next decade dying because they don't have access to health care. This is serious stuff.
People die from lack of health care coverage. They literally die when they don't get the services that they need. This is a number, and the bottom line is that it doesn't have to be this way. People will die for lack of health care coverage. People will go into bankruptcy. People will go into financial ruin. People will end up homeless. And one of the things that they're attacking, the program with the biggest bullseye on is probably the Medicaid program. Mm-hmm. And, Medicaid covers at least 4 core sections of Americans. One is senior citizens in nursing homes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Senior citizens in nursing homes. If you are caring for mom and dad, you might be a middle-class family, but your parent, your mom or dad is aging, your grandparents aging, and you are trying to be, a good family member, you may need Medicaid to keep them receiving the care that they need. Another group is, kids who have serious disabilities. I don't care if you're solidly middle class. You might be bringing home a fair pay, but if you have a child who has serious special needs and needs a lot of care, you're going to need Medicaid. If you're a low-income person, it doesn't, you're going to be needing Medicaid, and health care for kids often is paid for through Medicaid. So it's hurting seniors, it's hurting children, it's hurting people with disabilities, and it's hurting the families that care for them. Yeah. And that's probably 73 million people, okay? 73 million people.
Wow.
And so that is the program that is in the crosshairs of the American Health Care Act, also known as Trump Care. And, for me, if anyone ever wanted to say, what's the difference between, the social Darwinists who've now taken over the Republican Party and the humanitarians who are, the progressives and often found in the Democratic Party? What is the difference? And the difference is that, we don't think America's biggest problem is that rich people pay too much in taxes. And they do think that is America's biggest problem.
Yeah.
We think America's biggest problem is that not enough people can go to the doctor when they're sick.
Yeah, or go to college when they want, or find a job.
Keep on going. I mean, you know exactly what I'm saying, Tom. And so, that's on my agenda. May I also share another thing I've been doing all week?
Please.
So one of the programs that I operate at the DNC under Tom Perez's leadership is the Resistance Summer. Mm-hmm. And it's a 90-day intensive program where we are engaging people on the ground in all 50 states. But, to do that effectively, you got to train people. So we had about 150 organizers from 43 states in Washington for a 4-day intensive training program. And we had leaders like Heather Booth. And, Tom, I don't know if you know Heather, but this is an awesome woman, by the way. I mean, Heather Booth she's a white woman, but she went down in 1964 to Mississippi to be part of Freedom Summer.
Wow.
And that's when she operated under the leadership of John Lewis, and that's where she met Fannie Lou Hamer. And the bug that bit her for social justice activism at the age of 19 has never left her. And so she was one of our trainers this weekend. So she was doing that, and we had folks coming through. Jamie Harrison came through. Tom came through. And we had great trainers like Artie Blanco. Artie Blanco is a tremendous leader from Nevada, and she is a tremendous trainer. She trains everybody, but she's particularly good at Latino outreach. And we had other great trainers like Aaron Black, who is a young man who's been. I met him when he was doing. Aaron was doing Occupy Wall Street. And he has just kept the fires burning. He's a Minnesota boy like me. And then Melissa Byrne, who's also, a person I met Occupy Wall Street a few years ago. She was there helping to train people. How do you knock on a door? How do you keep your data straight? How do you persuade people? What do you do when you run into a problem? Just a whole 4-day intensive program. And I just wanted to let folks know because folks think like, well, what are they doing over there at the Democratic Party? We're training activists and organizers. We're knocking on doors all over this country. We're reaching out to people. We had several rallies this week, and the organizers, part of their training was to go to the rallies on the Hill to save and protect health care. And so that's kind of one of the other things that I wanted to mention. We are drilling down and re-engaging and recommitting to the organizing model so that we can be in touch with our neighbors every inch of this country.
That is absolutely marvelous. Let's pick up a couple of phone calls here, okay?
Sure.
Okay, Gary in Washington, D.C., listening on Sirius XM. You are on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Boy, this is great. I have a situation. I'm living in Washington, D.C. now, and I lived in Virginia from 94 to January of 07. Just recently, I got a letter from Fairfax County telling me that I'm still registered to vote in Fairfax County. They sent it to my current Washington, D.C. address. I was unaware that when I moved from state to state, that I had to notify the state that I left that I'm no longer living there. I mean, I haven't paid local taxes since, I left in 2007. So this is a situation. I cannot be the only person in this situation. I'm sure they could use this as a means to knock me off the voter rolls, even in Washington, D.C., saying that I'm registered in 2 places.
So this goes back to Chris Kobach's interstate cross-check. Gary, thank you. Congressman?
Yeah, I would simply say call to the folks who sent you the letter, tell them you now reside in Washington, and assuming that you do want to vote in Washington, just make sure that you're registered there. And, of course, continue to tell the story. That cross-check phenomenon where people are being excluded and kicked off rolls is a very dangerous tool, just as dangerous as the photo ID and all the other tricks and devices. So I just thank Gary for bringing this to our attention because it helps alert people to what they need to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, absolutely. Congressman, you're going to stick around for the half hour, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. We're gonna hit just a real quick break here. Congressman Keith Ellison is on the line with us taking your calls, and we will be back in just a minute. Congressman Ellison, you can reach him at ellison.house.gov, and of course he's the #2 guy at the DNC, Deputy Director at Democrats.org. You can tweet him at Keith Ellison. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More with Congressman Keith Ellison right after this. And welcome back. Congressman Ellison just got disconnected. This is Murphy's Law, right? Oh, he's back. Okay, great. I was just going to say, we lost you, Congressman. We have our for-profit stations are in a commercial break for 4 minutes, but about half our audience is Pacifica Radio, Free Speech TV, whatnot, and YouTube and things. And so that half of the audience is still with us. So we'll take a call from a Free Speech TV viewer. Great. And then in 3.5 minutes, when we rejoin our commercial stations, we'll go back to the Sirius XM callers and KPHX and whatnot. So John in Minneapolis, watching on Free Speech TV. You are on the air with Congressman Ellison.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Congressman Ellison, what happened in California exactly? Because a report this morning, both from spokesman of Nurses United and then also the way that Amy Goodman handled this story, she didn't mention anything about the possibility that under Proposition 13 that that's why the assemblyman shelved it and why Jerry Brown wasn't interested in doing it this year because maybe they were afraid that they weren't going to get 2/3 to vote on it, and that was the best way to approach that. So I was really disappointed because, of course, I think it could go as it did in Canada with Saskatchewan, and then follow the rest of the nation followed because it was so successful. And actually, it's better to start out within a state like California because I think they could pull it off, and it would reduce the amount of money that was spent on health care because people would not have to pay very much. Well, they wouldn't have to pay any premiums. Yeah, they might get a tax increase, but the cost of actual health care is fairly expensive even.
So, John, let's get the answer from the congressman here, because we just have 90 seconds.
To tell you the truth, I've had a few calls about this, and I'm not prepared to say definitively what the backstory is. What I know is that a lot of folks are concerned that Assembly Speaker Rendon did not allow a vote for the single-payer health care proposal. And a lot of other folks are protesting him because of that. And, but here's what I would counsel. Just keep up the fight, right? And remember, we've come very close, and if we can get a bill through in California is such a big market that it will absolutely influence the rest of the country. But I know that emotions are running high, but for those of us who are not in the middle of the fight, I just say let's just make sure that our that we keep our eyes on the prize and and keep our focus on seeing this bill get a vote. Again, the emotions are running high. People are feeling strong about it because it is so very important. But at the same time, let's remember that the goal is to pass the bill, and by protesting, we're making it clear that this is something that people really, really want. But let's understand that, that's what we just have to do. We just have to keep our focus.
Yeah, amen. And California would be a great place to start, but apparently they do have a problem with Prop 13. But I don't know if that's. I've been trying to figure it out too, Congressman, and I've read so many different conflicting stories. I would just love to hear, the governor or the Speaker of the Assembly just come right out and say, "Here's why."
What's really going on? Yeah, I got to tell you, I have not heard a clear enough, definitive.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Keith Ellison on the line with us. And just a quick recap. We were just talking about the single payer in California, and neither of us, neither I nor Congressman Ellison, are really certain exactly why. And we're both trying to figure it out. Why the single payer bill is not coming to a vote in California. Am I saying that right, Congressman?
Yeah, that's right. But also, it's one of those fluid things where I just keep my phone, refreshed, and I stay on the phone with my friends in California who are in the middle of this fight. But look, we will have single-payer health care in the United States one day. It is going to take place during along a certain trajectory, and I think probably doing it in the States is the best way to move this movement forward. And so I'll say, whatever you do, don't stop the movement. And I'll continue to try to be the best ally I can.
Great. Justin in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Hi, Congressman Ellison. How are you doing today?
Hey there.
Okay. I'm wondering, because I know state laws are a little different, and I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm wondering if the fact that removing someone's rights, removing their health care, I believe it could be considered assault with intent to harm. And
well, it would cause a lot of harm. That's right. Legally, assault has a certain definition in state law, which is, an unwanted or unlawful touching of another person. That's why you have to even give consent before a doctor, starts to treat you, because they're going to touch you. So I don't know if it would fit the legal definition of assault, but I want to tell you it is assaultive, and it certainly causes harm.
Okay. Tora in Cincinnati, Ohio. You have a question for Congressman Ellison?
Hello.
Hey, hi, Tora.
Hi, how are you? I have three real quick things. First of all, I'm a parent of a 17-year-old that's had lupus since she's been 8.
Oh,
Here
sure.
in Ohio, Kasich expanded Medicaid. That's how we're able to pay for her medications. She's on a medication called Cellcept, which is about $1,200 a month. That is one of her 5 medications she takes.
Sure.
I have a stake in this fight. Because I feel like they're threatening my daughter's life. Second of all, I'm kind of disheartened in some of the people in the party talking about that you guys did not put out, the topics correct. That's why Hillary lost and all that. I got your stance pretty well, but I'm having a hard time because I think they are abandoning the most loyal base for a base that's never going to vote for them anyway. And when they say, working Americans, I work. I have my own business. I work hard, and it's almost like some people in the party are saying that I'm not in that category of working Americans. And we know that that's just a dog whistle for white Americans, the ones that did not vote for Hillary Clinton or any Democrat in the first place. And I feel like, because I talk to a lot of people, and I feel like the base is feeling abandoned, and it's going to be a problem. My third thing is that what is the party going to do about this interstate cross-check? Because if this voting is not sure up and fixed, and we fight these people, all of these efforts, these marching, these holding these people feet to the fire about all they're doing is going to be in vain if we get to the voting booth and we're handed a provisional ballot or we cannot vote.
Thank you, Tor.
Well, thank you, Tor, for those questions. And let me just tell you, I just want to let you know, my heart goes out to you on this healthcare fight. I know that you are directly and personally engaged. It couldn't be more personal for you. And I thank you for telling your story. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to tell your personal story, and but I think by telling your story, other people know that hey, that woman had the courage to tell her story. Maybe I'm going to tell mine. And so, thank you for that. And we just pray for your daughter's health, and we're with you on the issue of the Democratic Party reaching out to working Americans. The Democratic Party is basically all about you. You are who we exist for. You go back to the 4 freedoms that Roosevelt talked about. You talk about the right to a job, your right to education, the right to be able to succeed in the richest country in the world and be able to get a fair wage and retire in dignity, to get access. That's what it's all about, and I think it's critically important for us as Democrats and as Americans to understand that we have got to confront this racial issue. Republicans talk racially all the time, by the way. Whenever they say welfare queens or Willie Horton or build a wall or Muslim ban, they're speaking racially. Us Democrats got to be able to stand up and affirmatively embrace the idea that all Americans, every one of us, ought to be able to benefit from the American dream without regard to our race. And that when there's folks who have been held back historically, all of us, it's in all of our interest to make sure that everybody can be fully included. And if they need extra help to do it, then we should do it. I believe that racism obviously hurts people of color, but it hurts white people too. Here's one very clear example.
It is.
If you can exclude African Americans from the voting rolls in Florida, then that's how they won the 2000 election.
Yeah.
And
Catherine Harris throwing people off. Congressman, we're hitting the break here at the bottom of the hour. It's a hard break. I can't move it. But thank you so much for being with us, Congressman.
Thank you.
Congressman Keith Ellis.
Friday, maybe?
Say what?
See you next Friday, maybe?
Sure, I'd love to have you on.
To the Thom
We'll look
Hartmann
forward to
Program.
it. Thank
Call
you.
202-808-9925.
Congressman Keith Ellison, ellison.house.gov. You can tweet him at Keith Ellison. We'll be right back. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. And today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is Chapter 11. It's titled Corporate Control of Politics, page 170. During the bruising primary election season of 2008, a right-wing group put together a 90-minute hit job on Hillary Clinton and wanted to run it on TV stations in strategic states. Federal Election Commission ruled that the advertisements for the documentary were actually campaign ads and thus fell under the restrictions on campaign spending of the McCain-Feingold Act and thus stopped them from airing. Corporate contributions to campaigns have been repeatedly banned and in various ways since 1907, when Republican President Teddy Roosevelt pushed through the Tillman Act. Citizens United, the right-wing group, sued to the Supreme Court with right-wing hitman and former Reagan Solicitor General Ted Olson, the man who argued Bush's side of Bush v. Gore, as their lead lawyer. This new case, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, presented the best opportunity for the Roberts Court to use its 5-vote majority to completely rewrite the face of American politics, rolling us back to the pre-1907 era of the robber barons. And if there was one man to do it, it was John Roberts. Although he was handsome with a nice smile and photogenic young children, Roberts was no friend to average working Americans. If anything, he was the most radical judicial activist appointed to the court in more than a century. He'd worked most of his life in the interest of the rich and powerful and was chomping at the bit for a chance to turn more of America over to his friends. As Jeffrey Toobin wrote in The New Yorker, quote, in every major case since he became the nation's 17th Chief Justice, Roberts has sided with the prosecution over the defendant, the state over the condemned, the executive branch over the legislative, and the corporate defendant over the individual plaintiff. Even more than Scalia, who has embodied judicial conservatism during a generation of service on the Supreme Court, Roberts has served the interests and reflected the values of the contemporary Republican Party. End of quote. And the fastest way the modern Republican Party could recover its power over the next decade was to immediately clear away all impediments to unrestrained corporate participation in electoral politics. If a corporation likes a politician, it can ensure that he is elected every time. If it becomes upset with a politician, it can carpet bomb her district and with a few $1 million worth of ads and politically destroy her. In the Citizens United case, the Roberts court listened to arguments and took briefs and even discussed it among themselves as if they were going to make a decision. But instead of deciding the case on the relatively narrow grounds on which it had originally been argued, whether a single part of a single piece of legislation, in this case McCain-Feingold, was unconstitutional, the court asked for it to be re-argued in September 2009 and asked that the breadth of the arguments be expanded to re-examine the rationales for Congress to have any power to regulate so-called free speech by corporations. In this, they were going along with a request from Theodore B. Olson, who argued Bush v. Gore and would not just look at this narrow case, but go back nearly 20 years to re-examine and perhaps overturn their own ruling in the Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, where the court held that it was constitutional for Congress to pass limits on corporate political activities, as well as its decision in 2003 to uphold McCain-Feingold as constitutional. The setup for this 2010 decision came in June of 2007 in the Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life case, in which the Robert courts ruled that the FCC could not prevent Wisconsin Right to Life from running ads just because it was a corporation. The idea of Congress passing laws that limited corporate free speech was clearly horrifying to both Roberts and Scalia. Scalia went after the 1990 Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, in which the then Rehnquist court had ruled that the Michigan Chamber of Commerce was limited in its free speech in a political campaign because it was a corporation. Scalia complained this Austin was the only pre-McConnell case that this court had ever permitted the government to restrict political speech based on the corporate identity of the speaker. Austin upheld state restrictions on corporate independent expenditures, and God forbid the statute had been modeled after the federal statute the BCRA 203 amended. End of quote. The Austin case, Scalia concluded, with four others nodding, was a significant departure from ancient First Amendment principles. In my view, it was wrongly decided. Scalia was quoted at length from opinions in the Grosjean v. American Press 1936 case. In Scalia's words, quote, holding that corporations are guaranteed the freedom of speech and of press, safeguarded by the due process of law clause of the 14th Amendment. He also quoted the 1986 Pacific Gas and Electric Company versus Public Utility Commission of California case. The identity of the speaker is not decisive in determining whether speech is protected. Corporations and other associations, like individuals, contribute to the discussion, debate, and the dissemination of information and ideas that the First Amendment seeks to foster. The bottom line for Scalia was, quote, the principle that such advocacy is at the heart of the First Amendment's protection and is indispensable to decision-making in a democracy is no less true because the speech comes from a corporation rather than an individual. The book, Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Anything Goes Friday. I've got some news stories here I'll be sharing with you as we continue through the day. But for right now, your calls. Jim in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I have to disagree with you vehemently. I mean, I know you're a wonk about these things, and I know that you want to be textually correct when it comes to the Constitution, but this is how the Democrats lose, okay? If you talk to a Republican, a conservative, about the right to keep and bear arms, you don't hear them talk about the militias, okay? They never say that.
Not since Heller.
Simply state.
Actually, before the Heller Supreme Court decision, they would frequently talk about that. I've been debating this with these people for 14 years.
But let's talk about current politics, okay? They talk about an implicit right to keep and bear arms, right?
Right.
Okay. All citizens, according to the Constitutions, all citizens of the United States, regardless of color, regardless of age, over the age of 18, regardless of sex, have the right to vote. And that needs to be the message. I have on my car a bumper sticker that I had made that says the right to vote shall not be infringed.
But you don't see that in the Constitution, Jim. You're not quoting the Constitution in any of this.
Yes, I am. I'm quoting the Constitution.
What
I know. See,
part
this
of
is
it?
where you get wonky, and this is how we lose. This is the Democrats need to do exactly what the Republicans are doing. We need to have a message, a bullet point message that is absolutely clear. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any other state.
Yeah, I agree, and that would make a great constitutional amendment.
It is in the Constitution 4 times.
Where?
It is in the Constitution, the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 24th
The 15th Amendment specifically applies to former slaves and only male former slaves.
No, regardless of whether or not you were
regardless of prior condition of servitude.
Regardless, yes, regardless of your age, regardless of your skin color.
See, here's the problem, Jim. I agree with you. Right? I believe that the Constitution can be interpreted. Keep in mind, when the Constitution was written, the guys writing it knew that they wanted to make sure that about 3/4 of all the people that they had control over in the 13 colonies could not vote. And in fact, there was a huge debate over whether among white men it should be exclusively property owners. Now, they ended up saying property ownership is not a condition for voting, but you go back and read the Federalist Papers, huge debates about that issue. But they were very clear. That was just white men. And then the franchise got expanded to include African-American men in 1874 when the 13th Amendment was passed. And then it got expanded to include women in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. And then it got expanded to include 18-year-olds in I think it was 1972 that the 6th Amendment was passed. And each one of those added to the franchise, but the franchise was never all that broad. I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. I think that if the Democratic Party and probably me too started saying, we have a right to vote, we should demand a right to vote, but that implies that we don't have one. See, the problem is if we had an absolute right to vote, then Chris Kobach would have no privilege messing with your voting registration. If you had a right to vote, then Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush would not have been able to throw 60 to 80,000 to 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida in 2000, 3 months before the election that got George Bush within 536 votes of stealing an election.
You're telling me that the implicit right to vote for an 18-year-old only applies on my 18th birthday.
No, I'm not telling you that at all. I'm telling you, I believe personally that, if nothing else, that you could use the 26th Amendment to say there is a basis for everybody in the United States having a right to vote. But ever since Marbury versus Madison in 1803, the Supreme Court has set themselves up as the final arbiters of what is in the Constitution. And in Bush v. Gore, and I encourage you, Jim, to go read the decision. It's not that long. In Bush v. Gore, William Rehnquist, writing for the majority, said there is no affirmative right to vote for President of the United States in the United States Constitution. And that's pretty much a verbatim quote from that Supreme Court decision. The opinion of the Supreme Court is that there is no right to vote.
This is why we lose.
No, I get the argument, but it's also until you can get the Supreme Court to change their mind, or you can get Congress to pass an affirmative right to vote into the Constitution, Chris Kobach is going to continue to steal your right to vote. And I think that what's going on right now is right now you've got Kobach and Trump saying to all the states, give us your voting rolls, give us all the information. We're going to look for malefactors. We're going to prove there's voter fraud, right? And the Trump actually, in California, 3 million Mexicans voted for Hillary Clinton. That's what they're up to. And we need to be pushing back on it. We need to be pointing out how wrong it is, and we need to be demanding our vote. And I don't disagree with you that we should be using the language like the NRA did for decades, asserting. I mean, it started in the 1950s. The NRA was starting this or the 1960s actually. This bizarre legal doctrine that reverse engineered the Second Amendment to extract from it an individual right to own weapons, and including weapons of war. And that ultimately got put into law, again, by the Supreme Court in the Heller decision. But, prior to the Heller decision, there was no individual right to own a weapon in the United States. So, we're stuck in this situation where the Supreme Court is basically, the final arbiter of everything. And they decided in Bush v. Gore, and this was the necessary thing that Rehnquist had to do in order to give the election to George W. Bush, was to say, it doesn't matter what Jeb Bush did in Florida. You don't have a right to vote. It can be taken away from you, and there is no consequence to the people who took it away. And there was no consequence. Katherine Harris, in fact, got elected to Congress after she did that.
Tom, let me ask you one simple question. Okay.
I'm listening.
Let me ask you this, okay? If the Democrats, any Democrat, went to any state and asked for the complete rolls of gun owners, what would be the reaction?
Oh, they get nailed.
Okay, then why are we letting our government ask for every registered voter's information?
Well, first of all, they can just get it themselves. That information is a public record.
You're nibbling around the edges again. That is the challenge in the Supreme Court.
No,
you have
it's not.
To take it to the Supreme Court.
Right, but here's the problem. It's already been taken to the Supreme Court. George Bush took it to the Supreme Court. It was not Al Gore, by the way, who filed that lawsuit. It was George W. Bush, and which is why it's called Bush v. Gore, not Gore v. Bush. And when George W. Bush filed that lawsuit in 2000, in January 2001, when he filed that law, or actually I guess it was December of 2000, when George W. Bush filed that lawsuit, he asserted that he would suffer irreparable harm if all the votes in Florida were counted. That was the basis of the lawsuit, that George W. Bush would suffer irreparable harm if all the votes in Florida were counted. And the Supreme Court agreed with him. And the argument that the Gore people made was, wait a minute, those people in Florida have a right to have their vote counted, and therefore the decision of the Supreme Court of Florida, which was that every vote in the state should be audited, should be counted, should be, double counted, that decision should stand. And the Supreme Court struck down the Florida Supreme Court's decision that everybody in Florida had a right to have their vote counted. So we are in a situation right now where, in order to install George W. Bush as president, 5 right-wing ideologues who were appointees of Republican presidents on the Supreme Court basically changed our Constitution, in my opinion, and obviously yours, and asserted that, no, you don't have a right to vote. And we can't just pretend that that's not there, Jim.
Then some way we have to get into the Supreme Court, and I would do it as a class.
You do it right now. And Thomas and Gorsuch in particular, but they've got now a 5-vote majority. We don't know where Kennedy's going to fall on this, but Kennedy's not going to be on the court more than another year or two, and in all probability. In fact, there was a lot of speculation that he was going to be leaving this year. that, you know, we've got this situation where if you go to the Supreme Court right now with this, I'm guessing we would lose. That's why I think that you need to go around the Supreme Court. You need to pass a constitutional amendment that says, I realize what a big lift that is. You know, in 240 years, we've done it 28, 29 times. We've got to pass a constitutional amendment that says that we have an absolute right to vote, or at least legislation that says that. Jim, thanks for a vigorous discussion. I appreciate it. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. Oh, we're going to check in with Talk Media News, too, I believe. And welcome back. Lynn in Houston, Texas, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Well, I just kind of want to draw your attention to the perfect example of Republican misogyny. You, a bit ago, just read a list of hundreds of bills that Nancy Pelosi got passed in 74 days.
Right.
Well, Mitch McConnell is called masterful and skilled and a wizard, and he can't get one thing passed.
Well, actually, you know, they did get passed allowing mining companies to dump more crap in the rivers.
Okay, one thing. But they diss Pelosi. So if people want government that works, they should vote Democratic.
I agree. And Nancy Pelosi is an extraordinary legislator. And, you know, I know that there are...
I submit that she's the wizard and masterful and skillful.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I am such a fan of Nancy Pelosi, and you know, these. I think, frankly, that you know there's as many Republicans behind the calls for her to step down as there might be Democrats, because they know that she can. This is a woman who takes names and kicks ass. She knows how to get things done. She knows where the bodies are buried. She knows how to apply pressure, political pressure on people. She knows how to accomplish things. And if you look at the history of what she's done, the vast majority of what she's accomplished have been things that benefit every citizen, you know, we the people. So, Lynn, I'm spot on. I'm with you. Lynn, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Leonard in South Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV. What's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? It's really good to talk to you.
Thank you.
And one of the things we talk about medical, isn't it something that do no harm? Isn't this bill do nothing but harm to a lot of people? So they're, in violation of the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, the AMA actually issued a statement last week, or maybe it was early this week. If it was like Monday or Tuesday. It must have been Monday. But in any case, in the last 10 days, the American Medical Association issued a statement quoting that and quoting the Latin for it, which I can't remember, omnia praecipitus or whatever. Actually, it wouldn't have been omnia. That's all. But the AMA said, our guiding principle is first do no harm, and then they said it in Latin, and then they said this bill will cause the death of Americans. It's primo non nocere. Thank you, Troy. And so yeah, you're absolutely right, Leonard.
I have one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we need to do is get rid of the neoliberals from the Democratic Party. They're nothing but another arm of the very wealthy.
Yeah,
they need to
well,
go.
I agree. And what we're watching, I think, right now, right in front of us, is the death of neoliberalism. We're watching it all around the world. People going back to the core fundamentals of their parties. In the Republican Party, it's not, they're abandoning neoliberalism in favor of simply being total toadies to the billionaire class. And in the Democratic Party, they're abandoning neoliberalism to go back to the core principles of the Great Society and the New Deal, and which I think is a fine thing. It is going to take some time to kind of work the corporate Dems out of the party, as it were. But I see it happening, and I think it's a good thing. Leonard, thanks for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back. Patrick Gavin will be with us in just a minute with Talk Media News to bring us up to date on what's going on in the world today. So stick around. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheold.com and Free-Don. Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And on the line with us is Patrick Gavin. Patrick, welcome.
How you doing?
Great. And I hope you are, too.
I'm hanging in there. It's a little slow as we head into the July 4th week. But sadly, Donald Trump still has his Twitter account, so it's never a slow news day.
Yeah. The latest is Joe Scarborough this morning essentially alleging that Donald Trump or people around him tried to blackmail Scarborough, and then the president tweeting, no, he didn't, and then Scarborough tweeting, yes, you did, and I've got the text messages to prove it.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that, and that's sort of, they obviously wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and that was really interesting, and I actually don't even think I imagine it will over the weekend. I don't know that it's gotten as much attention as it should, just because it's incredible. I mean, this is while he was president, not just candidate Trump. You're right, it is blackmail. And, part of the issue here is, there's a paper trail, at least if you're to believe Scarborough and perhaps even Trump. I'm sure Trump saves things as well. And the National Enquirer, I guess, did come out and say that we didn't harass Mika Brzezinski's kid, which, I guess leads to the definition of what does harass mean. But
right.
But yeah, I mean, it just gets uglier and uglier. And I think someone had a good point on Twitter today, which is that when you go down the list of the people that Trump has, abused on Twitter, Megyn Kelly, Rosie O'Donnell, Heidi Cruz, Elizabeth Warren, Mika Brzezinski, and never Vladimir Putin. He's never said a single bad thing. And,
or pretty much any other man. Well, I guess he went after all the men he was in the Republican primary against. But by and large, his ongoing feuds tend to be with women, it seems.
Well, and obviously there's been a lot of talk, including from Joe and Mika in their op-ed, about the president's mental health. And I get that that's a sensitive topic and a tricky one. But to me, what's the most wild about this stuff is what happened yesterday. And you would think saner heads would prevail, and either Trump or his surrogates would be like, you want to know what? He didn't get enough sleep. It was a rough morning. He apologizes, etc. But then doubles down on it today. I mean, and saying that he finally tuned in, and then adds this whole National Enquirer element to it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm living in an alternate universe, but it just seems to me that if you make a mistake, own up to it, apologize, move on. But the White House, by either from Trump himself, Kellyanne Conway, or Sarah Huckabee Sanders, no one.
I doubt Trump in his entire life has ever taken responsibility for a failure or a mistake. Yeah. I think that he is he was so wounded by his childhood that he's psychologically incapable of it. But anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Gavin?
Yeah, and less positive news, perhaps. So we are getting a little bit of trickle of news on the health care and the Republican Party's attempt to repeal it. Interestingly, does bring you back to Trump's Twitter account. Him saying today, quote, if Republican senators are unable to pass what they're working on now, they should immediately repeal and then replace at a later date, which is bizarre on a number of levels. Number one, I think if you are hoping to get this thing passed through Congress, you should not, via Twitter, try to tell Mitch McConnell what to do. And two, I mean, that just seems like a really poor grasp of how Hill legislation works. I mean, that is what they're trying to do right now. I mean, they are trying to repeal and replace it. And if Trump thinks that there's going to be a better chance of success later than now, I mean, even in a week from now, that just shows a real, I think, failure.
He is hemorrhaging political capital. But, I've been hearing people for months say that whatever Donald Trump's opinion is, it basically reflects the last person he talked to. And I believe Rand Paul was over at the White House for lunch yesterday. And Rand Paul is running around every television network this morning saying, I agree with the president. We should just repeal Obamacare, do away with all those taxes on the billionaires immediately, and cut all those people off Medicaid expansion immediately, close down the exchanges immediately, and then we'll fix it later. And just, end the taxes on the billionaires. And, apparently that was his sales pitch to Trump. I mean, those are not the words he used, but that's the essence of what he was saying. And apparently he convinced Trump of it.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, this is why this is difficult. This is a three-legged stool. I mean, even if you were to agree that Part X needs to go away, I mean, you do have to somehow replace it with something. I mean, unless you just want total catastrophe.
Well, I think that's what Rand Paul wants. It's certainly what the Koch network wants. You know, the Koch brothers have come out and said this latest bill is not conservative enough. Conservative, I mean, what the hell does conservative mean anymore? I guess it means doesn't comply with the wishes of billionaires or big corporations, but it's bizarre.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, things are not, you know, I think when we talk a week from now, I don't know that it's going to be, you know, it's tough to keep any momentum going through recess, especially in the, you know, latest CBO analysis says the government will spend 35% less on Medicaid in 2 decades if Obamacare repeal does become law. So the question is, you know, are there any sweeteners that can be assessed to this thing, being, you know, pre-tax health savings accounts, billion.
Well, McConnell's got $180 billion to play with, so that's a lot of money to pass out.
It is. I'm probably more pessimistic that opioid funding, which I think they ought to do, obviously, I don't know if that's going to sort of do it all for the moderates to come on board. I mean, it's going to help.
Well, it also depends on what opioid funding means. I mean, if they're going to throw billions of dollars into expanding the war on drugs, that's the exact wrong thing to do. If they're going to spend that money on treatment facilities and, you know, building them, expanding them, things like that, or even shooting galleries, those are having very, you know, the great success in Canada and the UK, you know, where junkies can come in and get fresh, clean needles so that, you know, it reduces the transmission of HIV and AIDS and Hep C and things like that. But, you know, I'm not hearing any details coming out of these guys at all, just the word opioid.
Yeah,
so we'll see.
And the latest polls aren't great as well. It's only 12% of Americans support it. And even worse, only 26% of Republicans support it. So, you know, this idea of an unpopular proposal.
Right. They're keeping a promise that they made to a base who had been malinformed by Fox News and right-wing hate radio that Obamacare was somehow destroying America and destroying jobs, et cetera, when in fact it was the opposite of that. And so they got all these people believing that this straw man boogeyman is out there and that they would come in and kill it. And now, you know, they're trying to kill it. And everybody's going, hey, wait a minute. We didn't mean that. You know, my health insurance? Really? Anyhow, Patrick, we got about a half a minute. Any other news in the world that we need to know about?
Yeah, the last thing I was going to say is looking ahead to what we might think is a slow news week. Next week will be the first face-to-face meeting between Trump and Putin. That's going to be a photo opportunity that everybody will be looking at. And it's interesting. I think Axios reported today that the people in the White House are trying to make sure that there are as many aides in the room as possible.
Yeah, good idea.
You know.
Yeah, I hope Trump is well prepared for it because I guarantee you Vladimir Putin will be. The guy is no dummy. Patrick Gavin, we talk media news. Thank you, Patrick.
Take care.
Yep. Good talk.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is toward the very end, and it's a chapter titled Transforming Culture Through Politics. Many think it's just to fund tax cuts and subsidies for the rich, that the multimillionaire CEOs who've taken over almost all senior posts in government are just pigs at the trough. And this is a spectacular but ordinary form of self-serving corruption. It all seems so plausible, and there's even a grain of truth to it. But juicy deals for right-wing government insiders and their friends are just a byproduct of the real and deeper war against democracy. The neoconservatives are perfectly happy for us to think that they're just opportunists skirting the edges of legality and morality. But this is far more dangerous than simple government corruption. Indeed, the neoconservatives claim to be anti-government. As a leading spokesman for the neocon agenda, Grover Norquist told National Public Radio's Mara Liasson in a May 25, 2001 Morning Edition interview, quote, "I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub," end quote. Without a larger view, the issues of domestic spending, oil, neoconservative power plays in both major parties, the loss of liberties, anti-government rhetoric, and war in the Middle East all seem like separate and unconnected events. They're not. The new conservatives who've seized the Republican Party and who, through the Democratic Leadership Council, are nipping at the heels of the Democratic Party are not our parents' conservatives. Historic conservatives like Barry Goldwater, Harry Truman, and Dwight Eisenhower would be appalled, although their philosophical roots go back to Alexander Hamilton, who openly argued during the Constitutional Convention that royalty was the best form of government. The neocons have always been kept to the fringe. Indeed, the Reagan-Bush revolution flew in the face of traditional conservative ideals. As John Stockwell notes in his book, The Praetorian Guard, the U.S. Role in the New World Order, Reagan and Bush were proud of their contempt for their concerns of environmentalists, with Reagan once saying, "If you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all." Their Department of the Interior under James Watt sold off minerals and forests to campaign contributors at fire sale prices, and their EPA, in many cases, moved from prosecuting corporate polluters to legitimizing and protecting them under the guise of regulation. Although James Madison wrote in 1792 that an important role of government was to promote a strong middle class, quote, "by the silent operation of the laws, which, without violating the rights of property, reduce extreme wealth toward a state of mediocrity and raise extreme indigence toward a state of comfort," end of quote from James Madison. That was not a sentiment shared by those in the Reagan-Bush revolution. Instead, Reagan raised taxes on the middle class and working people while cutting taxes by more than 60% for the most wealthy in America. At the same time, he bragged that he'd eliminated more than 1,000 programs for poor people and even proposed that poor school children should be content with ketchup as their daily vegetable. At the same time, the Reagan-Bush administration and later the George W. Bush administration worked hard to roll back the very individual liberties that America's founders had fought and died for. Dwight Eisenhower left office warning Americans about the dangers of the concentration of power resulting from corporations getting into bed with the military. But the Reagan-Bush and W. Bush administrations openly embraced these corporate powers, inviting them into the halls of governance and hungrily sucking at the teat of their campaign contributions. In the past, those promoting what is now called the New Conservative Agenda went by different names. The founders of America knew that for 6,000 years, civilized human beings had been ruled by one of three groups: kings, theocrats, or feudal lords. Kings held power by virtue of the threat of violence and continual warfare. Theocrats and popes held power by the people's fear of a god or gods, and feudal lords by wealth and the power that comes from throwing average people into poverty. The new idea of our founders in 1776 was to throw off all three of these historic tyrannies and replace them with a fourth way: the people being ruled by themselves, a government that derived its legitimacy and continuing existence solely from the approval of its citizens. Government of, by, and for we the people. they called it, a constitutional Republican democracy. What we are seeing now in the conservative agenda is nothing less than an attempt to overthrow Republican democracy and replace it with a worldwide feudal state. The last time this happened, the feudalists took over a monarchy in North America. In December 1600, Queen Elizabeth I chartered the East India Company, ultimately leading to a corporate takeover of the Americas for the colonists that ended with the Boston Tea Party, and 3 years later, the American Revolution. The corporate state partnership of the East India Company and the UK went on to conquer India, but eventually disintegrated as the British Empire faded and the British government, along with most of Western Europe, embraced somewhat more Jeffersonian forms of democracy. Conservatism raised its head again in the 20th century, revived by Franco, Hitler, and Mussolini. The Italian dictator even used the word corporatism to describe it and then later renamed it as fascism, a word defined by the American Heritage Dictionary as, quote, a system of government that exercises a dictatorship of the extreme right, typically through the merging of state and business leadership together with belligerent nationalism. The book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of things I wanted to share with you, just kind of big picture ideas, as it were, that are, I think, are useful to know about. The first has to do with profits, dividends, corporate profits. I've talked about it this before, but I'm gonna recap it real quickly. One of the principal, first of all, back before the Reagan administration, it was a violation of tax law in the United States to pay employees with stock. You couldn't do it. And employees could buy stock in a company, and they could often buy it under preferential terms, you know, with subsidies from the company and things like that, or at discounts, or, you know, the company would buy stock at the lowest point and, you know, sell it to employees at cost, that kind of thing. But you could not give employees stock as compensation. During the Reagan administration, the Stephen Moores of the world, the Art Laflers, the trickle-down economics guys, they pitched this idea, and they had been selling this since the 60s. But, you know, Reagan was the first person who took it seriously and said, oh, great idea. And it got turned into law by the Republicans, by Newt Gingrich and friends. And during that era, what the sales pitch was if the CEOs and the senior executives, let me back up a little bit. The sales pitch back then was the real owners of the company are the stockholders, which is technically true. Well, it's absolutely true. The real owners of the company are the stockholders. And therefore, every decision that the company makes should be made in the interest of the stockholders. Now, that part was not at law, right? And so to incentivize the senior executives to always make their decisions in ways that will help the stockholders, and by the way, it was big stockholders who were pushing this, you know, very, very, very wealthy people who owned large blocks of stock in various companies. In order to incentivize the senior executives of companies to only make decisions in the context of what's going to improve the stock value, we will allow, under IRS regulations, we will allow them to receive compensation in the form of stock options. So say you're the CEO of Acme Company, and Acme Company, and you just got, you know, as part of your compensation this year as the CEO of Acme Company, you got, you know, say 100,000 shares of Acme, and they're selling for $10 a share right now on the NYSE, on the New York Stock Exchange. Well, you're the CEO, and you've got an option to buy them at $10, 100,000 shares. That's $1 million, right? So you've got $1 million worth of stock options from your work this year. And by the way, that's peanuts in the CEO world. I mean, some of these guys are literally getting hundreds of millions of dollars of stock options every year. So in any case, let's say you got $1 million worth of stock options. You're the CEO. So if you can figure out a way to get that stock price from $10 up to $15, then you do what's called exercising your option. You say, okay, great. I'll buy that 100,000 shares at $10 a share, even though the price right now it's selling for $15. I'll buy them at $10 a share because that was my option price. And then the next day I'll sell them for $15 a share, and I will make, you know, the 50% profit on them. So the $1 million becomes $1.5 million, and I'll walk away with $500,000 in profit, and I've sold the stock. So what can you do to increase the value of the company, of the price of the stock? Well, typically, historically, before the 80s, before Reaganomics, what executives did to raise the value of their stock was they built their companies. You serve your customers better. You serve your community better. You serve your workers better. You treat your workers better. You produce new and innovative products. You engage in new marketing campaigns. You expand your production facilities and capabilities so your product gets better and better. Those are the things they used to do. Now, let's say that the Acme company that you're the CEO of has in total 1 million shares out in the marketplace. Now, a lot of companies have a lot more than 1 million, but just, to work in round numbers. Let's say there's 1 million shares out there, and they're selling for $10 a share, which means the company is worth $10 million, right? This is a small company. It's worth $10 million. So if you were to have the company go to a bank and borrow money or take the profits from this year's activities and buy, let's say, half of those 1 million shares that are out there. We're going to have the company buy 500,000 shares from the public, buy them back and retire them. The company now only has 500,000 shares that are available to purchase. But the company's still worth $1 million. Well, if you've got 500,000 shares or worth $10 million, so if you've got 500,000 shares rather than 1 million shares, that means the value of every share has doubled. So your share price just went from $10 to $20 simply by buying back shares. If you have the company buy back their own shares and retire them, it jacks up the stock price, and you don't have to do a damn thing. You don't have to improve your product. You don't have to pay your workers better. You don't have to pay attention to your community. You don't have to do new marketing. You don't have to develop new products. You don't have to improve your manufacturing. You don't have to do a damn thing. You don't have to spend a penny on anything. You just sit back and take the profits. Harvard Business Review, 2.5 years ago, in September of 2014, published an article titled "Profits Without Prosperity." And they pointed out this scenario that I just shared with you. But here's where it gets mind-boggling. They found that of the Standard & Poor's 500 companies, the top 500 companies in America, the S&P 500, 449 of those 500 companies allocated 91% of their corporate earnings, 91% of their corporate earnings, that's $2.4 trillion, for stock buybacks. None of these profits were invested in America. It was all to fund stock buybacks or to pay out dividends to shareholders. $2.4 trillion in 2012 and 2013. And, of course, all the senior managers have these stock options. And, by the way, when you sell your stock options, when you exercise your stock option and then you sell your stock, the maximum income tax you pay is not the 39% that your surgeon, pays on his $400,000 a year for being the best orthopedic surgeon in the world. No. If you're buying and selling stuff, if you're a CEO, the maximum tax you pay is 20%. Well, now it's 23.8% because of the 3.8% add-on there to pay for Obamacare, for the Medicaid expansion and for the subsidies for working-class families. So that's how bizarre it gets. The other story I was going to share with you is about hoarding, but I'm kind of running out of time here. That took longer than I thought it was. So we'll talk about that next week. But it being Anything Goes Friday in the midst of Anything Goes Summer, I would be remiss if I did not take your calls. Glenn in Olivet, Michigan. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind?
Hey, happy Friday, Tom.
Thank you. Back at you, Glenn. By the way, if I can just add the punchline to the story that I just told about stock buybacks. What this means is that the reason the stock market has been going up and up and up and up and up, particularly over the last, since 2009, but arguably ever since the Reagan administration, the reason the stock market has been going up is not because our companies are healthier. It's not because we're producing the world's best products. It's because our senior executives are gaming the system. And that is a bubble that will burst. Okay, so done with my rant now. Glenn, to you.
Okay. Hey, my wife went to the mailbox and brought back the mail. She said, well, this one's kind of interesting. I said, what's that? She said, it's actually a survey from the Republican National Committee. And so we get looking through this, and although the questionnaire and everything, a lot of the questions look pretty legitimate. But then I'm looking at the back page where you have to sign it to send it in. And they want you, the Republican National Committee wants your support anywhere from 25 to 1,000 or other.
So it's a fundraiser.
The second line is, no, I can't contribute today, but I want to support our president and his agenda. And my contribution of $15 to cover processing is included. The next line is, no, I don't want to support the president and Republicans in Congress. So basically, the way I'm reading this is if you don't give them the $15 to cover the processing, this is going to make for good media news because everything's going to be all about Trump.
Well, it also, I would be asking the question, Glenn, why did you get that survey? Typically, those kind of surveys only go to registered Republicans. Has your voter registration been flipped on you?
Actually, it came to my wife, and she's never voted Republican. I'm actually a retired sheet metal worker, and I've never voted Republican. I haven't got one, but it'll be interesting to see if I get one, see if it's actually a broad range survey where they're actually trying to survey everyone.
I doubt it. I doubt it, because typically they don't want those things to be in Democrats' hands. So, Glenn, I would strongly suggest, and call us back and let us know if there's some, perfidious behavior here on the part of the state of Michigan. But I'm guessing that your wife's voter registration has been flipped from independent or Democrat to Republican, and that's why you got it. But I could be wrong. I don't know. But I would strongly encourage both of you to call your Secretary of State's office or your county clerk and make sure you're registered. Glenn, thanks for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here in the midst of Anything Goes Summer right after this. And welcome back. Jim, watching Free Speech TV in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
My friend Thom Hartmann, professor.
Thank you, Jim. What's up?
The smartest man in all media. And
well,
you are.
Okay. What's up?
Wear that hat proudly. Anyhow.
Yeah, this is not a Trump cabinet meeting, Jim. It's not necessary. What's going on?
Anyhow, the one thing that DNC should be doing, and I hope Keith Ellison has a podcast to your show. If not, he should buy one. Anyhow, why do you not recount the votes? I was quite desperate last Friday because you said you just take the computer cards and go recount them, but why do you not have the ability? Why does the DNC not invest in recounting the votes?
Well, it's not the DNC's job. It's that's at the level of the county commissions and the Secretary of State's and the individual states.
Okay,
we don't have federal standards for voting. We only have federal standards for giving money to states to buy voting machines. That's what the Help America Vote Act did in 2002. It gave $5.6 billion to the states to buy machines from three companies with Republican management.
Okay, Tom. The other simple solution I have, one is recount. Recount for the reason that you see who has been given provisional ballots, who has been not counted.
Yeah.
But we need to have our votes counted.
Well, here's another idea, Jim. until 2000 in the United States, we used exit polls. And our exit polls until the year 2000 were always accurate within a tenth of a point on who was winning. And starting in the year 2000, actually starting in 98, but it got really noticeable in the 2000 election. Starting in 2000, we noticed this phenomena referred to as redshift, where 5 or 6 critical swing states moved 2, 3, 4, 5 points. The voter outcome was more Republican than the exit polls showed. Now, when that happened in Ukraine, we said proof of voter fraud, or election fraud, rather. The people tabulating the votes were lying about who voted and what they said. And we used those exit polls in Ukraine.
The people counting the votes. It doesn't matter who votes for who. We're both Michiganders. Michigan, who counts the votes there and who's overseeing it?
That's my point. And what I'm saying is that, the Carter Center travels around the world, and the United Nations travel around the world, at validating or verifying the veracity of elections in foreign countries. And the tool that they use 100% of the time is exit polls. And we've basically done away with exit polls in the United States because they got so inaccurate, because the redshift got so massive. It never shifts in the direction of Democrats, or very, very rarely. It always shifts in the direction of Republicans. And I'm telling you, if the Russians can poke into our election systems, so can Republicans. And in fact, in many cases, they own the infrastructure. Jim, thanks for the call. So I would say, if you want a solution to the problem, let's start looking at our exit polls. In Germany and numerous other European countries, they report the result of the election when the polls close, even though they don't count the ballots for another day and a half, because they're doing exit polls, and the exit polls are always right. Why are ours wrong? Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Pierre in Brookings, Oregon. Hey, Pierre, what's up?
Hey, Tom, let me take you out speaker.
Thank you very kindly. I appreciate it.
So how goes the good fight today?
Step by step. What's up?
I've identified some legal elements of negligence, and I think a case could be made that if the present Republican proposal for health care is enacted, that, the government will be guilty of negligence.
How so?
The first element of negligence, and I took about a tenth of a second to look this up on Google, is that the person who's being accused, or institution, organization, whatever, has to have a duty of care toward the person who's harmed by their actions. And I think you could make a pretty good case that the government does have a duty of care toward its citizens.
You could use this argument, Pierre, couldn't you, against any red state governor that refused to expand Medicaid?
Absolutely.
I mean, Charlene Dill in Florida had a heart condition. She had 2 kids, maybe 3 kids. She was a mother in her 30s, and she had to cut her medication in half because she couldn't afford to pay for it because Rick Scott refused to expand Medicaid. She died. Her blood is on his hands. Her family should be suing him, in my opinion.
Right, mine as well. And the second element is that there has to be a demonstrable link between the negligent action and eventual harm. And the case you cite is probably a pretty good example of that.
Yeah.
There also has to be a demonstration that there have been losses or injuries, and those can be monetary, they can be physical, they can even be emotional, although that strays into a different tort, intentional infliction of emotional distress and that sort of thing. So, where you go with this, whether this has federal standing and, individuals could bring suit in federal court, or whether it would be some huge class of Americans, the ones who in the next decade, the 22 million or so, would lose their health care and thus be injured, have monetary losses because they can't go to work, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know where you would take it, but it sure seems like a pretty slam dunk kind of a thing to me.
And if we were Republicans, we would have billionaire donors who would fund those kind of lawsuits. I mean, that's
exactly.
You know, the NRA did that for 20 years, and they finally got the Heller case. You know, the Hobby Lobby people. These lawsuits are generally funded by so-called foundations or think tanks that are front groups for billionaires with an agenda. And you know, tragically, there's just not that much money on the Democratic side, on the progressive side. But that's, you know, I would love to see a lawsuit like that. And I don't think that we have to wait for the federal government to pull the rug out from underneath people. I think that we could go after red state governors right now. But I'm not an attorney, so my legal advice is suspect. But it makes sense to me, just at the common sense level. And I would love to see it working through the court system. And, you know, if there's anybody listening who is a lawyer who would like to take on a case like that, you know, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on the possibility and the viability of it. Pierre, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Happy Friday, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Back at you.
Well, one thought first, before I get to my main point. When we were talking about President Obama's accomplishments earlier in the program, and I think that the Cash for Clunkers program always needs to be brought up because that removed a lot of you know, pollution, a lot of polluting cars, and stimulated the economy, and was a really successful program that he gets enough credit for.
Yep.
But I wanted to chime in on the Joe Scarborough and Mika Twitter war with Donald Trump, and just kind of vent my frustrations because he's just a complete national embarrassment with the way that he's been. The way that he objectifies women, he's very crude and crass, and really has no business chiming in on cable news network anchor, you know, people. It's not his place to be concerning himself with that. And I like that a few one Republican Congresswoman, Lynn Jenkins, called him out on it and said in her Twitter feed, you know, as a female in politics, I'm often criticized for my looks. We should be working to empower women. And Senator Susan Collins says this has to stop. You know, we all have jobs, 3 branches of government.
Well, Marty, I think you could take it a step beyond that. The First Amendment says that the freedom of the press shall not be abridged. And the missing words there, but they're implicit in it legally, are by the government. Well, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and he is the, you know, if anybody's an agent of our government, it's him. And here he is essentially shutting down the press. So isn't that a violation of Mika Brzezinski's, you know, freedom of the press?
I completely agree. And he should be above, way above. You know, there's like real issues for him to be concerning him about whether or not, you know, some political talking heads or pundits or whoever are, you know, talking about him. That's
totally agree. Marty, we're out of time, but I totally agree. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Press reached out to a bunch of folks, me, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi David Wolpe, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chuck Colson, Neil Donald Walsh, and asked for thoughts about a spiritual response to the attack on America. The result was a book, From the Ashes. And this is from the chapter that I wrote, The Goddess of Democracy, a Sacred Archetype to Heal the World. People argue that the terrorist attacks against the United States reflect a war between one religion and another, or between the poor and rich of the world. While there may be an element of truth to each, I'd suggest that the real war here is between the 11th century and the 21st century. And while our leaders, and until our leaders figure that out, we may miss some great opportunities. Back in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled Europe. Women were often forbidden to go out in public unless properly covered, and were explicitly the property of men. Justice was swift and severe, ranging from disfigurement to torture to death in horrific ways, and most often meted out with the approval or supervision of clerics. The power behind the power of all the royal families of Europe was the Pope. On November 27, 1095, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches to the Council of Clermont in France, calling for a holy war against Islam to unite factious Europe. Dr. E.L. Skip Knox of Boise State University in Idaho summarized the Pope's speech. The noble race of Franks must come to the aid of their fellow Christians in the East. The infidel Turks are advancing into the heart of Eastern Christendom. Christians are being oppressed and attacked. Churches and holy places are being defiled. Jerusalem is groaning under the Saracen yoke. The Holy Sepulchre is in Muslim hands and has been turned into a mosque. The Franks must stop their internal wars and squabbles. Let them go instead against the infidel and fight a righteous war. God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Thus began a war between two different medieval cultures, 11th century Catholic and 11th century Muslim. Over the next few centuries, the Catholics, with their battle cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, were often victorious against the Muslims, whose only crime defined by the Pope was that they were living in the Holy Land of the Catholic Church. Medieval historian Raymond of Aguilles wrote the following eyewitness account of the attack and seizure of Jerusalem in 1099 by the triumphant Christian crusaders. Quote, some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hand, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there? If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say, this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. End of quote. In the 900 or so years since the early Crusades, both Christianity and Islam have undergone profound changes. The Protestant Reformation shook Christianity to its core, and the Renaissance in Europe wrought huge transformations in both Christianity and Judaism. Perhaps the most critical change came about in the 18th century when Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and others synthesized the highest ideals of Greek, Roman, and Iroquois thought and culture to create the United States of America. In doing that, they ignited the flame of liberty, bringing into the world an archetype that to this day inspires hope worldwide. As America grew and our ideas of Republican democracy spread around the world, further transformations of the world took place. Another turning point was when modern science challenged the medieval worldview of the church in the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Although Clarence Darrow lost that case, its widespread publicity began a dramatic and lasting process of change across the world. The American dream is a powerful and pervasive force in the world, even if the sometimes imperialistic behavior of our transnational corporations is often at odds with our own ideals. That dream has wafted over the entire world and is still so powerful that people are willing to die for it. In China, the Tiananmen Square protesters marched to their doom in 1989, carrying a 37-foot-tall papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty, which they had renamed the Goddess of Democracy. Of course, there are still pockets of medieval perspective in the Christian world. The post-disaster comments of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who said they had just witnessed the wrath of their God, who had lifted the veil and allowed the terrorists to act because of their God's anger over homosexuals, liberals, and the ACLU, reveals that such a worldview is still alive and well in a small fringe of Christianity. Some Christians are still today willing to commit terrorist acts of murder or mass murder. Timothy McVeigh and those who murdered numerous abortion providers all claim their acts are grounded in Christianity and biblical teachings. And just as 21st century Christianity still has its own pockets of medieval worldview, so does 21st century Islam. And then it gets into, how these reformations happen and, what we hope to see in among those right-wing crazies in Islam. The book is From the Ashes, A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
And it's free, and there's not even any ads. Hartmann Report is great fun. It's our summary of the news of the day. It's HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to ask you a climate science question just to change the topic a little bit.
Cool.
All right. Hey, did you see this story about all the pyrosomes, or, as they're called, sea pickles, washing ashore in the Pacific Northwest?
No. Tell me about it.
Well, they are, they're a planktonic creature. They go with the ocean currents.
Sort of like jellyfish. Right.
Yes, and they're also pelagic. They stay out there in the open water and in warm water as well. Mm-hmm. And they don't have their own locomotion. They just move. Yeah, like you said, jellyfish can actually have some locomotion. But anyway, these they're washing ashore in the Pacific Northwest. They shouldn't be there. I mean, it's either some sort of weird weather occurrence that's causing warm water to move northward, or it's just another indicator of, the climate change changing the ocean.
Right. Well, about 90% of the heat increase that we have produced since the 1850s has gone into the oceans. So it would make sense that, if planetary Earth temperature is up by, 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit right now since 1850, that probably the ocean is too, and that might be enough to basically push what used to be Central California sea temperatures up to being Oregon and Washington State sea temperatures. I don't know. I'm just, guessing, but what do you think?
Yeah, it's just another indicator. I mean, I think there's definitely something going on with ocean and saltwater dynamics.
Yeah.
And it could be thermohaline cycle for all I know. I mean, I'm not.
Well,
I'm not 100%.
The thermohaline cycle out of the Pacific is way down in the off Southeast Asia, is where it, between there and Hawaii is where it starts, and then it loops around the southern tip of Africa, and then comes up the east coast of South America, Central America, and North America. We call it the Gulf Stream, and then it goes back down into the floor of the ocean off the coast of Greenland, where the warm water hits the cold water, and it goes all the way down to the bottom of the ocean and loops all the way back around in the exact same path back out into the middle of the Pacific. So, and that's being driven by temperature and salinity, thus thermohaline. And, but I don't know of any specific, loop currents on the Pacific, off the west coast of the United States. But I'll have to look into it, Dave. I didn't know about this. Just plug sea pickles into a search engine. Is that how I do it?
Yeah, sea pickles, and one occurrence of a strange or one appearance of sea pickles in the Pacific Northwest. Extraordinary occurrence. That doesn't mean the thermohaline cycles change. I didn't mean to imply that.
Right.
I'm just saying it's, this a thermohaline cycle, any changes to that is very significant to the global climate.
Oh, yeah, and particularly the European climate and northern European climate, because it provides the heat that, England is at the same latitude as I believe, Fairbanks, Alaska, or thereabouts. I mean, it's fairly far north, but it's kept warm by that great conveyor belt, they refer to it as, that thermohaline circulation. But I think that this is probably a manifestation of just general warming across the oceans. And where that gets really spooky is if it starts warming up the methane crystals that are frozen on the seabeds, which is happening in the Arctic. So, oh yeah, in fact, somebody in the chat room just, strange sea pickles keep washing ashore in the Pacific. Most recently, NBC Bay Area reported that the sea dwellers have been causing a stir in Monterey Bay, frustrating fishermen trying to catch salmon and shrimp. Fascinating. I'm going to have to check it out. Dave, thanks for the heads up, and thanks for the call. Bob in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
All right. You know, I was listening to you about the presidential election there, Bush versus Gore, and that Bush claimed that he would be harmed if those votes were counted.
Irreparably harmed, yes.
Yeah. So I wonder, why couldn't a person who is denied his voting right, couldn't we take that same premise and flip it and have a civil lawsuit, and all those that were purged off the voting rolls could claim that they were harmed because they lost their liberty.
We could, and they did. The ACLU of Florida launched a lawsuit against Katherine Harris, Jeb Bush, and the state of Florida for that voter purge, where they took the Texas felon list and compared it with the Florida voter list and knocked off all of Florida voters whose names, first and last names, were also on the Texas felon list, and which was disproportionately people of color. And that, to the best of my knowledge, that lawsuit never got resolved. I really need to check in with the Florida ACLU and find out whatever happened, because there was a major lawsuit, and I've never heard of any resolution of it. Perhaps somebody who's listening right now, particularly in Florida, might know, but I don't know the answer to that. But it has been done, Bob.
Well, so things have changed, because even back then, the current list was different than it is now. It must be. So it seems to me that legislation is never going to solve our problem, that the problem needs to be solved by a civil lawsuit that all persons interested, Democrats, contribute to, and that they address this subject, and that those who are denied their right to vote, they, instead of claiming that they had a right, a constitutional right to vote, which they could claim, the court would decide, but they could claim that it was against their liberty.
Yeah. No, I agree. The big danger, of course, is the Supreme Court, because for the next 20 years or so, it's going to be controlled by right-wingers who are going to be deferential to the Republican Party and whatever helps the Republican Party. And
so what you're saying is, if the lawsuit was won, if the civil lawsuit was won, those Republicans it was won against would then try to take it to the Supreme Court.
Right, which may have already happened. I don't know. Like I said, with the Florida case, I remember when the lawsuit was filed. I remember the marches. I mean, you know, it even got covered in the news in 2001, 2002. But where it went and how it got resolved, I just don't know, and I need to find out. So, Bob, thanks for putting a bee into my bonnet about this. I'm going to get on it, but you know, I think that it's a really good argument. You stripped my right to vote, you know, off the voter rolls. That was a tort. That was a damage. That was a harm, and I'm going to sue you based on that. And I'd love to see this happen. But you know, maybe it's already been blocked by the courts. I just don't know. I have to find out. Bob, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on about 17 minutes before the end.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Fred in Los Angeles watching us on YouTube. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Just regarding, well, first of all, I just want to make the statement that since the Republicans are so anti-union, and in the Constitution it plainly states that in order to form a more perfect union, obviously that we can see the dichotomy there. Yeah. But the question I have is, I think there was either a change in the Constitution or a change in the law that senators would no longer be decided by the Electoral College, but by direct right. It
was never the Electoral College. What it was that in the original Constitution, senators were appointed by the states, and they left it up to the states to how to do that. And in a couple of states, senators were elected. In most states, senators were appointed by the state legislatures. There were a couple of states where the senators were appointed by the governors. and it became insanely corrupt. Probably the peak of it was in Montana. There was a guy by the name of, as I recall, Cooper, and I remember that because it sounds like copper, because there was some guy who was a copper baron in Montana, and he literally went into the Montana legislature with a handful of $1,000 bills. This is back when the government actually printed $1,000 bills, which would be worth, probably $10 or $20, $50,000 now. Went in there with a bunch of $1,000 bills and said, anybody who votes for me to be the next senator from Montana, I will give one of these bills to as you walk out of the chamber. And they voted him into the Senate, and the United States Senate, the U.S. senators, refused to seat him for the first year. And, maybe his name wasn't Cooper, but whatever his name is, I remember the story. And that was in the, as I recall, around the 1880s, 1890s. Oh, 90 seconds, yeah. I thought maybe you knew the year, Troy. That kind of corruption is what led to the, what was it, the 17th, 18th Amendment, something like that, the 19th Amendment that, direct election of the senators.
Right, but does that mean that we have a right to vote directly for senators?
Yeah, Troy says it was 1890.
Right, we're going to attack what we've been talking about that way, because if they take you off the voting rolls, you can't vote for senator either. Right,
that's correct. By the way, the senator who was passing out the money, the copper money, was William A. Clark in Montana. And thank you to Troy and his Google machine. Oh, actually, I just got this also from our chat room, William A. Clark. Sue and the folks in the chat room are, they're so good. They are so good.
What I'm saying, instead of having a right to directly vote for president, we have a right to directly vote for senator. And if they take you off the voting rolls, you can't vote for senator either.
Well, let me just see if the word "right to vote" appears in the amendment that there's women's suffrage, prohibition of liquor, direct election of senators, 17th Amendment, 1912. It was ratified in April of 1913. The Senate of the United States should be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. When vacancies happen, this amendment shall not be construed as to affect the election or term of any senator chosen before it becomes valid. It doesn't say anything about your right to vote for the senator. It simply says that the states shall have senators who are elected directly by the people. So it's basically throwing it back to the states, how they want to handle it. So that's not something we could use as a federal right to vote, in my opinion, as a layman's opinion. But it was a good try. Fred, thanks for the call. Hey, thanks so much to our show director, Louise Hartmann, to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, to our video director, Chris Mendelis, to our radio and TV producer, Troy Miller, to our phone screener, Nate Atwell, to our writer-researcher, Nate Sweet, to our webmasters, Nigel Peacock and Jamie Holly, to our business manager, Ron Hartenbaum, to everyone at the various companies that syndicate this program, Digital Media, Pacifica Radio, Sirius XM Satellite Radio, Cable Radio Network, Free Speech TV, on Dish Network, DirecTV, and all the cable providers who carry our show, including Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and all the others around the country, to all the great folks at Free Speech TV and RTTV who work on the big picture, to the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn, to Netroots Radio, to our newsletter editors, Sue Nethercutt, and all the folks in our chat room. Hey, to Ellen Ratner, Victoria Jones, Bob Ney, and everyone at Talk Media News, to Jay Goodman-Tamboli for tech support, to our affiliates, our sponsors, and to you for supporting our program. Thank you. Thank you so much. Shirley in Chicago. Hey, Shirley, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Thank you. I'll get you off speak.
Thank you, Shirley. I appreciate it.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
First of all, great show as always.
Thank you.
But what I want 2 quick things. And this morning, did you watch Morning Joe this morning?
For about 45 minutes, yeah. Louise and I saw the part where Joe and Mika came back from vacation to trash.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right. Did you see Donnie Deutsch?
Yeah, where he said, schoolyard bully, I'll beat you up, and Scarborough said, no, we're not going to talk like that.
Right. Well, you know what? It was hard not to agree with him, although I don't like taking the low road, but it was hard.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why, and this might be a kind of mid-road, not high or low, is that why anybody hasn't called this guy out, the Teflon Don, for his hypocrisy. He is bleaching his hair a different color every week. He's got this ridiculous comb over. His wife buys caviar for creams for their kid, and he has the nerve to mention anybody's looks or how they're looking. I don't get that. The other point I wanted to make, and I wanted to talk to Keith Ellison, but I'm more than happy to hear your opinion. I'm kind of really upset that the Democrats don't take a hardcore stand when Trump says Obamacare is dead, it's a disaster, you know, all those things. Why isn't anybody calling him out just as loud as he is that it's not dead? It's not a disaster. Yeah. The Dems aren't loud. They're not aggressive enough on it.
California just produced a little 30-second spot about how the Affordable Care Act is working so well in California. And if you want to know how to make it work, just look at California. And in fact, I think his name is Anthony Reardon. I'm probably wrong on this, but the Speaker of the Assembly in California just tweeted this thing out. I retweeted it. You can find it on my Twitter feed. And
will do.
And so they're trying to get the word out, and you know, a lot of us are trying to get the word out. Those states
not loud and strong enough, and I don't hear anybody on MSNBC screaming about it.
Right. Well,
you know,
the Democrats do an awful lot that never gets covered by MSNBC. I mean, the Progressive Caucus holds an event in this town at least a couple times a week. It never is covered on any of the cable networks or television networks. If the Tea Party does something, of course, it gets coverage everywhere. But, of course, the Tea Party's kind of gone now. But if Rand Paul does something, or John McCain, any Republican of consequence does something, it'll be national news. But when Democrats say things, do things, protest, I mean, we had at Donald Trump's hotel here, night before last, he was there for a $35,000 a plate fundraiser for his 2020 presidential election bid. And Rob Weissman, the head of Public Citizen, the organization that Ralph Nader started back in the 60s, Rob Weissman and a whole bunch of people from Public Citizen were there in front of the Trump Hotel protesting. There were all kinds of protesters. It didn't even get mentioned in the news from everything I saw. I mean, I never saw a mention of it. Not that I watch all the news, but as far as I could tell, it was just kind of invisible. I mean, it's just, but had it been right-wingers protesting, had it been neo-Nazis, had it been Richard Spencer, it would have been covered because our press loves the right wing. That's just, you know, that's the bottom line. Shirley, I've got to move along. We're coming up toward the end of the show, and we've got a bunch of people on hold. Thank you for the call, though. Excellent point. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've been listening since the local show here in Portland, so thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
All right. I'd like to ask you a couple questions regarding the voting process, but I want to preface the questions with an observation about the 2016 election.
Okay.
Yesterday, you had a woman call and talk about the TPP swinging the election to Trump, and you agreed, and I would too. And I'd take that a step further by pointing out how Hillary picking Tim Kaine stoked that skepticism on her free trade positions. And not only that, but squandered all the energy of the nearly half the party that Bernie had generated. But my question to you, Tom, is this. Even if we're successful in fighting back against cross-check and other voter suppression tactics the Republicans always deploy, as long as we continue to vote on these easily hacked and voting machines with no paper trail, in other words, unverified and unverifiable voting process, can we have any confidence in restoring our democracy? And if not, how do we get Democrats to take this fight on?
Yeah. Well, they are taking the fight on. Mark Pocan authored legislation last week to deal with cross-check. There has been legislation presented to Congress over the years several times. I believe that Bernie sponsored one of them to do something about the voting machines. But this has not been a top priority for the Democratic Party, and it should have been ever since 2002 when the Help America Vote Act was passed. You know, the Republicans just, in my opinion, suckered in a bunch of Democrats and said, "Oh, kumbaya, let's all get together and make, after the hanging Chad debacle in Florida, let's make sure that never happens again." And here we are, screwed with these voting machines. I agree with you, Jeff, that this needs to be a higher priority for the Democratic Party. And, if Keith Ellison, he said he's going to come back on the show next week, next Friday. It'll probably be around the same time, probably 1 o'clock, taking calls from listeners. Get in line to talk to him about it. Okay?
Sounds great. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
Weekend.
Thanks for the call. David, in Ketchum, Idaho. David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. For Anything Goes, I'm talking about the America's Cup and the great Kiwis. And these guys were like Muhammad Ali. And they were...
The New Zealanders?
Pardon me?
People from New Zealand, Kiwis, you said?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They take nothing away from them. Do you know who invented the hydrofoil?
I don't.
Alexander Graham Bell.
Really?
Yes, he got snuffed by the Wright brothers to try a flying machine, so he went to the water, and he had an airboat, and he was driving the boat through the water on the hydrofoils.
Huh.
And he was a fantastic man. He was one of the first feminists, and there's a great picture of him in 1912 standing on the shore, and his wife driving the boat at 25 knots across in 1912.
Wow.
It's really a good story.
Huh.
The other situation is that there is a little bit of corporation involved. The reason that they held it in light airs is because NBC insisted that they hold it in the middle of June instead of September, which is the air is, and the winds are way heavier. The Kiwis took advantage of that with nothing against them, and they ran marvelous races. But if NBC hadn't insisted on making their time slot because there wasn't anything going on in the middle of June, and in the fall they had the World Series and the football and all that stuff, it could have been a different outcome. But
that's interesting.
The way corporations work.
Yeah, well, that's the way the media cycle works. It's a good one. David, thanks for the call. Bill in Tucson. Bill, we just have about 30 seconds left. You got a quick comment you want to make?
Hey, Tom?
Yeah, Bill, you're on the air.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, man.
We're down to 20 seconds now.
In a long time, but I have a real problem with Donald Trump, and I would like to.
I'm listening. Bill?
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Not Bill.
Yeah. Bill, we are running out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the call. We'll have to catch up next week. And, we will be back next week. But in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July holiday, weekend, whatever it may be. And stay safe. Be very, very careful of and with fireworks. Of course, I guess that doesn't even need to be said, but nothing wrong with that. And let's keep an eye on these Republicans. They're up to something sneaky here with this healthcare stuff. So, if any time, this now is really the important time to say, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, which includes you. Get out there, get active. Peg, you're in. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com.